Hey everyone, this is James from TDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today I am going to be talking about everyone's favorite, Pu'erh storage. And I'm going to be talking about an important question that I think anyone that's trying to answer the question of what am I trying to do solution-wise for Pu'erh storage needs to grapple with and ask themselves first. And that is defining your Pu'erh storage goals and what is it that you are going for. And I think depending on the answer, I think how you will end up storing the tea and how you will end up designing that, I think a lot depends on what you want and what you are doing. And I think there are probably a few too many people that are just kind of blindly stumbling around buying stuff and end up storing Pu'erh, or you end up in overly complicated solutions that they don't necessarily need. So I think in many ways, if we are able to define this for people, especially that aren't heavy Pu'erh drinkers, there is not really a huge need to fuss over it. So anyways, going to get into that a little more deeper into the episode. There are certain rules that everyone agrees about on Pu'erh storage. For instance, smells. Teas that, are kind of around each other are going to smell like each other. Tea will absorb smells from other things, so bad advice generally to store it in the spice cabinet. Also bad advice to, store it close to a kitchen where it's going to pick up, garlicky smells, things like that. Another one, avoid light. That one is generally consensus. You don't want to store your Pu'erh in the sun or anything like that. These are all generally pretty easy, with the exception of the people that I find to be kind of insane, the people that insist on storing their Pu'erh in like very, very smelly wood cabinets. It violates one of those very kind of immutable, undisputable rules of Pu'erh storage for something that's aesthetic, which to me at least, if you're trying to store Pu'erh, you are trying to consume it too. So I get why people want to have things stored nicely, but for me that is absolutely secondary or tertiary. One that is a little bit less consensus-wise is airflow. And you are going to find all kinds of different opinions on airflow. I land kind of towards the lots of airflow is definitely not very important. But anyways, we don't need to get too far into that. And depending on what sort of storage you're trying to, what you are really trying to achieve in your Pu'erh storage goals, I think that question doesn't necessarily need to be answered. You don't necessarily need to have a good answer for that. This is something where I think there's a lot of people that really have strong ideas of what they want to do. So if you're going to ask Reddit or ask different people how they should store their tea, some people are going to have these ultra specific answers, this is the optimal, this is the only way to store tea. Of course I exaggerate quite a bit because there are a lot of people that fall somewhere in between, and there's a lot of nuance there. And I think in general, if someone really has the one solution to Pu'erh storage, they don't really have any solution to Pu'erh storage at all, because the answer is it's going to depend a lot on kind of what I was talking about, your Pu'erh storage goals and what you are trying to go for. Depending on the goals, and depending on how specific they are, you're going to have to be a lot more specific or controlling, or not. If you are going for something, it's like, hey, I have a relatively small amount of tea, and I want to just basically maintain the quality. It's okay if it gets slightly weaker. Then I think having a really, really simple storage solution makes far more sense than going way out of your way to come up with something incredibly elaborate. And I get that some people are tinkers, but not everyone wants to be, and not everyone needs to be either. And generally speaking, the more factors, the more things you want to control, the more difficult things are, and the more things that can potentially go wrong. So if you're trying to create something ultra specific and have this all kinds of high-tech gadgetry that you need to run for 10 or 15 years, that's obviously not going to be everybody. It's fine if you want to do that for your own tea, but that is not something that's going to work for the majority of people. Okay, so I kind of have these 3 or 4 categories that I wanted to walk through and just sort of talk and use as examples of what I'm talking about in terms of Pu'erh storage and your goals. So goal number 1, I have a relatively small amount of tea, let's say less than 10 cakes or so, and I want to just basically keep these as drinkable as possible for short-term consumption within 1 to 2 years. So the goal is not to necessarily age the tea, but maintain relative drinkability. So again, I think in general, even when you get to more complex things you're trying to do, simpler is good. If you have to like run these humidifiers manually from 12:30 to 3:35 p.m. every day, and then you have to run the fans at certain times, that to me is no good. That is way overcomplicating things. I think in general you want to push for simpler is better. So in my opinion, the best way to do storage here is very simple. You put it in a Ziploc or you put it in a Mylar bag. Is it going to be perfect? No. Are you going to get airflow? Not necessarily, but I think the airflow, when we're taking into the different considerations, is far overpowered by things like worrying about it drying out, picking up odors, and things like that. So the fact that it doesn't get airflow, that's a contentious topic, but I don't think that's necessary at all. And so in this case, I think it's a no-brainer. You want to store it in this way. And anyone that's telling you to store it in a more complicated way, beyond that, I think is somewhat diluting themselves. The tea is not going to lose humidity that fast if you're storing it in like a relatively good quality Ziploc or Mylar bag. Okay, goal number 2. I want to keep 15 to 30 teas for midterm consumption in 3 to 5 years. I would say at this point still, you just want to maintain the relative drinkability. You don't necessarily want to age the tea. You don't really want it to get worse. I would basically just do the same thing as scenario number 1. You just need to allot a little bit more space to do that. The one thing you can consider if we are looking at these larger time frames is you can consider humidifying the tea slightly. The easiest way to humidify the tea, again, is something relatively airtight, something like a Mylar, and then just toss like a Boveda pack or something like that into it. And that's a really effective way of doing that. You can buy a hygrometer if you want. If you don't want to, you don't have to either. And you could just toss that into the Mylar bag and measure it. Generally speaking, when it comes to humidity and airflow, it's hard to have both without being too complicated. So if you're trying to have a solid amount of airflow as well as amping up the humidity, that's a significantly different, more challenging problem than just having airflow or just having humidity. So in my opinion, it's not at all worth worrying about the airflow in this case. I think the humidity is a little bit more of an important factor when we're talking, just in general, but in this range, certainly 3 to 5 years. Okay, so goal number 3, this is a little bit closer to what I have myself, and that's where you basically want a lifetime of Pu'erh stored for the very long term, 20 to 40 years. You want to improve and age it, and the reason is, I like Pu'erh. I also think it's a fun experience and experiment, and I think prices are going to be more expensive for aged Pu'erh potentially in the future, or at least they're certainly not guaranteed. And in this case, you need something that's going to scale up in size, and I think that becomes increasingly important there. For me, again, I want to have the simplest solution I possibly can, and you could argue whether I do or not, but basically what I'm just doing is storing all of my tea in an unplugged Eurocave, so basically just this giant fridge, and I'm amping up the humidity with things just very simple like Boveda packs as it falls to a certain threshold. So in the end, it's relatively simple maintenance once I have it going. It certainly does take up a fair bit of space, and it's very heavy and annoying to move for sure. But it's a relatively simple storage. I don't need to look at it. I don't need to monitor it every day. I think when people are thinking about solutions, you can look at these things a little bit idealistically. I'm going to, I'm going to just like check on this every day or even every week. And that's going to become very, very cumbersome because Pu'erh storage is a long-term game. And when we're talking about not just a year or two, that's still quite short-term, like 10 to 20 years. You are going to want something that you're not going to have to check on daily. So that's about where I end up there. And so, these solutions are all kind of one beyond the other. But I think it's really, really important to define them so you are not overly engineering for a problem that you don't necessarily have. And so you're treating it with the appropriate scope. I think it's absolutely totally fine to fall into kind of category 1 or 2. Of course, there are going to be people that are sort of in between in different ways. I think long-term storage is not for everyone. In fact, I don't think it's for the majority of people that do Pu'erh in the Western world, and I think that's totally fine. Goal number 4 is something even more specific beyond me, and that's where you are really that's where you want to recreate certain conditions. So one thing I'm not doing with my tea is I'm not heating it. I'm not messing around with that stuff. I do find that stuff very, very interesting and very, very fascinating to do. And so all the more power to people that want to do it. But at least for me, it's a complication that I don't necessarily want. Even though my personal preference is to have a little bit more storage that's sort of on the tropical side of things rather than something that's closer to Kunming, which is probably honestly what my storage actually is. It's just a trade-off that I'm not willing to make, and for me at least, that's a totally reasonable decision, in my opinion at least. Okay, I hope that helps everyone in terms of just thinking about their own Pu'erh goals, their storage. Just because you ended up buying a lot of Pu'erh doesn't necessarily mean you need to be trapped into one of these longer term solution things too. Plenty of ways to just give it away or just to drink it. I think if you ended up with 50 cakes haphazardly, which I'm sure does happen to some people, just determine what you actually want a little bit longer term, put those in Mylars, maybe humidify those, just drink through the rest of them real quickly. Very easy to accumulate Pu'erh under somewhat faulty premises, but I think that's it's understandable in a certain way. So let everyone know. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I will see you all next time. Cheers.